Why do so many people believe that the little girl's parents were guilty? And, on a deeper level, what does this case reveal about America, a country where JonBené only lived for a short time? In this episode, we're diving into the story of Linda Hoffman Pugh, the Ramsays' former housekeeper, an ordinary woman who somehow found herself at the center of suspicion. But why? What drove her to sue the district attorney just to be able to share her experience with the grand jury? And what changed in her story? Now, imagine being in Linda's shoes. When the Ramsay family's book was released, she realized they had indirectly pointed fingers at her as a potential suspect. A woman who was simply working for the family, suddenly thrust into the harsh spotlight of suspicion. How would you feel? Scared? Angry? Wronged? But the story doesn't end there. Linda later attempted to write a book. The title, Someone is Getting Away with Murder? Maybe she wanted to scream to the world the truth she believed she knew. But why was that book never published? What or who stopped it? Before we move on, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, go ahead and click the blue icon at the bottom right of your screen. Hit like, share, and drop a comment below. Because coming up next, we're going even deeper. Not just analyzing the events, but breaking down the psychology behind each character. Think about this. Why did Linda Hoffman Pugh reach out to Darnay Hoffman? Through this connection, articles by Benita Sauer, another figure drawn into the case, came to light. Why did these two women share such similar stories? Both wanted to write books, both claimed to hold crucial information, yet in the end, both were forced into silence. This isn't just a story about a murder case. It's a story about how the truth can be controlled, about the mindset of those accused, and how the media can shape public opinion. Let's keep digging, because sometimes the truth isn't only found in what's spoken, but in what's been forced into silence. Specifically, on August 11, 2000, shortly after the Ramsay family published their book, Linda Hoffman Pugh made a bold decision. She sued the district attorney. Why? Because she believed she had to speak out. But what truly drove her? Was it simply an attempt to clear her name, or was there something deeper? Picture this. An ordinary woman working in a luxurious home, suddenly seen as the prime suspect. Linda had always kept to herself, stayed in her lane. But when the Ramsay family's book came out, she realized they had indirectly singled her out as a potential suspect. If you dig into the police reports, you'll see that Linda Hoffman Pugh was almost immediately considered a top suspect. But why? Was it simply because she was there, or because she knew something others wanted to keep hidden? Even if she hadn't known before, the release of that book made it crystal clear. Now, imagine what was going through Linda's mind. The media buzzing, all eyes on you. You know something, a dark truth, but you can't speak. Why? Because you're a grand jury witness. You've sworn to remain silent. The truth you want to scream becomes a burden that weighs heavily on your mind. Linda made a shocking claim in the first chapter of the book she intended to write. I am the only woman in the world, aside from the Ramsay family, who knows who killed JonBené. A bold, jaw-dropping statement. But was it the truth, or just the voice of a mind pushed to its limits? Then came a major development. Linda Hoffman Pugh filed a lawsuit in Denver District Court, seeking to make her entire story public. At that time, she was represented by attorney Darnay Hoffman, a man with deep inside knowledge of the case. A tense legal battle quickly emerged between Hoffman and Lynn Wood, the attorney for the Ramsay family. What do you think happened next? If Linda's book had been published, it would have offered a completely new perspective, a major shock to the public. But here's the twist. The grand jury had wrapped up its work in October 1999, and all reports at the time claimed no indictments were issued. But here's what truly matters. The truth is, there was an indictment. So why was it kept secret? Was someone controlling the narrative? Or was this a carefully orchestrated plan to hide a truth the public wasn't ready to hear? And that's the critical point. There was an indictment, which means there was an even greater reason for this story to be buried, especially for those named in that sealed indictment. In cases like this, it's often assumed that witnesses might hesitate to reveal what they know. Linda Hoffman Pugh was no exception. She feared that if she disclosed the questions the grand jury had asked her, District Attorney Alex Hunter might prosecute her. But why would a witness be afraid of prosecution? Perhaps she heard something, a veiled threat, or worse, a subtle reminder that sometimes the truth isn't welcome. I believe this case is a mirror reflecting America in the early 2000s, a country where accountability could be dodged by shouting louder, repeating the same message often enough, and spinning the narrative through strategic PR campaigns. If you control the story, you control the truth. But is that really the case? And here's the chilling part. When a narrative is reinforced through media campaigns, it gradually overshadows all other stories. In the minds of the public and the so-called court of opinion, one version of the truth replaces another. In the Ramsay case, the reality the family pushed was that an intruder committed the crime. But is that truly the case? Or was the perpetrator a family member? Or, even more unsettling, did every surviving member of the family play a role in covering up the truth? We're faced with two entirely different narratives, and only one of them can be true. So, what really happened? Which story holds the truth, and which one is just a well-orchestrated cover-up? Linda Hoffman. Pugh's story serves as a prime example of how truth can be distorted and buried. But you have to ask yourself, why? Who stands to benefit from this story being forgotten? Let's go back to Linda. She feared that Alex Hunter would prosecute her. And here's the incredible irony. The Ramsay family was never brought to trial. There was no formal criminal proceeding to determine who killed JonBenét's. Yet somehow, the legal system threatened to prosecute the housekeeper, the only person willing to speak the truth. Think about that for a second. Doesn't it seem absurd? A child was murdered, but instead of focusing on finding the killer, the legal system went after the person who wanted to share what they knew. In the end, Linda Hoffman Pugh asked the court to rule that the grand jury secrecy rule violated her First Amendment right to free speech. She wanted the court to prevent Alex Hunter from penalizing her if she disclosed materials related to her testimony. So, what's really being hidden? And will justice ever truly be served? Honestly, I can't imagine Linda Hoffman Pugh taking such a legal step unless she had heard something from Alex Hunter, maybe a subtle threat. Of course, I'm only speculating. But there's a lingering feeling that if she truly pushed forward and made everything public, Hunter would step in. Another interesting detail is that Linda also wanted the court to compel the district attorney to submit a copy of her grand jury testimony. Why was this so important? Because if her testimony were made public, it might reveal truths the public had never heard. I'm not sure if that would ever happen, but if it did, it would definitely be a major development. Additionally, Linda requested reimbursement for her legal fees and other remedies as the court deemed appropriate. This shows that Linda wasn't just trying to tell her story. She was trying to prove something much bigger. But how did Alex Hunter respond? Bill Wise, Boulder's first assistant district attorney, stated that Hunter wasn't even aware of the lawsuit. That response made it seem like Hunter had no idea what was going on. But did he truly not know, or was that just a convenient way to dodge the question? Andrew McDonald, another assistant district attorney, was reportedly the one handling the case. Naturally, McDonald refused to comment, claiming he hadn't reviewed the lawsuit yet. But was that just standard legal procedure, or an effort to hide something? There's another angle from Bob Grant, a former district attorney and one-time advisor to Hunter. In August 2000, Grant commented on the case, emphasizing that the grand jury's secrecy rules had historical and practical legal purposes. Wouldn't it be in the public's best interest to know what the housekeeper knows in this case? Would it really cause any harm? That question forces us to think, could what Linda knows completely reshape the narrative the public has come to believe? And there's one more point worth highlighting. How many others have written books about this case? Many of those individuals also testified before the grand jury. Steve Thomas, for example, testified and later wrote a book. The Ramsay family. They published a book, too. Here's the critical question. Did the Ramsay family testify before the grand jury? If they didn't, why not? If the Ramsays were truly the focus of the investigation, their refusal to testify raises some serious questions. Could this have led the grand jury to view them as the most critical witnesses? And if they deliberately avoided testifying, does that mean they were hiding something? Former FBI criminal profiler Greg McCreary, a colleague of John Douglas, described the decision of whether to compel the Ramsay family to testify as a legal chess game. In a quote from the Daily Camera, he said, "If you've got hours of videotaped interviews, you can just show them to the grand jury. But the question is, do you want to show those and then bring the Ramsays in to try to expose some inconsistencies in their statements? But what if the truth doesn't lie in the testimony itself, but in what was never allowed to be revealed?" Professor Gerald Israel from the University of Florida, an expert in criminal procedure, also pointed out that the grand jury's purpose wasn't necessarily to prosecute someone. He explained, "If the real objective is to find an explanation that might clear a suspect, you'd want to know that up front." And there's another critical point worth considering. Dennis Hall, the senior deputy district attorney of Jefferson County, noted, "A suspect can testify, but they'll often invoke their Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination." That's something to seriously think about. But what about Linda Hoffman Pugh? Linda worked for the Ramsay family for 14 months, a considerable amount of time. She was hired right around the time of the incident and was present at the now infamous Christmas party on December 23rd. She was scheduled to return to work the following day, December 24th, but didn't make it due to health reasons. Soon after, Linda Hoffman Pugh was questioned by police in connection with JonBenét's death. She provided both hair samples and handwriting samples for the investigation. Although no official suspects were publicly named, Boulder police maintained that JonBenét's parents were the primary suspects. So, what was really going on here? It's clear that, even without publicly naming suspects, the authorities focused heavily on the Ramsay family. And that leads us to ask, why? What exactly happened that night? Here's something interesting to consider. Linda Hoffman Pugh may not have realized she was a suspect in the eyes of the public, but she was almost certainly viewed as one by the Ramsays themselves. Imagine how that must have felt. You work for a family, believing they trust you, only for them to hand over your information to the police for investigation. The situation even escalated to include her husband. While the Ramsays publicly denied any involvement, their attorney, Lynn Wood, subtly hinted that the book Linda Hoffman Pugh planned to write wouldn't paint the family in a favorable light. But why would a book make the Ramsay family so nervous? If you think about it in the simplest terms, housekeepers often have access to unflattering details about the families they work for. And sometimes that information can come at a cost to the family's reputation. What's fascinating is that Lynn Wood, the Ramsays' attorney, seemed to acknowledge this. Here's a direct quote from him. Although what she might say about them could be unflattering, the reality is, does she need to sugarcoat anything? After all, there's nothing Linda Hoffman Pugh could say about this family that would damage them more than what others have already said. Lynn Wood even expressed confidence that Linda Hoffman Pugh's 13-plus months of grand jury testimony should be made public. He stated, "The entire truth should be revealed to the public." But here's the real question. What would happen if the entire truth came out? Would the Ramsay family still be comfortable if the public learned everything Linda Hoffman Pugh knew? And why would they fear a book, if, as they claimed, they were completely innocent? Let's take a moment to consider what Lynn Wood might have been trying to do. It seems like he was employing a strategy often referred to as throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Instead of simply allowing Linda Hoffman Pugh to tell her story, he suggested pulling back the curtain on the entire case. But did Lin Wood really want that to happen? I'd argue he knew that would never occur, especially considering the sealed nature of the indictments. Wood's argument was clear. If Linda Hoffman Pugh was allowed to speak openly, then everything else should come out too. John and Patsy Ramsay even echoed similar sentiments. But let's play devil's advocate for a moment. What would happen if the full truth were revealed? Would John and Patsy still feel at ease if the news broke that there was an indictment, one that was never signed? The more pressing question is this: what did John and Patsy know about those indictments? And who else knew? It's likely that only a criminal defense attorney would have had that information, since they have a certain level of access to case files during discovery. Honestly, it's hard to believe the Ramsays wouldn't have known, especially when you consider that in the U.S. legal system, suspects have the right to access information necessary for their defense. Let's take an example from the Chris Watts case. Chris Watts clearly had access to all the investigative files, and that access may have shaped the version of the story he presented after his initial confession. Doesn't that make sense? By having access to the discovery materials, he could see what others were saying about him and adjust his story accordingly. Now, let's draw a parallel with the Ramsay family. If they truly wanted the entire truth to be revealed, that would suggest to the public that they had nothing to hide and were completely innocent. But is that really the case? Remember this: it took nearly a year before Linda Hoffman Pugh was finally allowed to speak about what had happened. And during that time, a lot occurred. While Linda remained stuck in legal limbo, unable to say a word about her experiences or testimony, the Ramsay family published their book, launched a nationwide book tour, appeared on CNN. Let's be honest, they had plenty of time to profit from their story. The Ramsay family skillfully shaped and cemented their version of events in the public's mind. But what about Linda Hoffman Pugh, trapped in silence, unable to defend herself or share what she knew? Finally, after a long wait, a federal judge ruled that the grand jury could make their secret testimony public, a pivotal moment in the case. And, apparently, it wasn't just the housekeeper who would be able to speak. So, what had really been hidden all this time? Will the entire truth ever come out? And if it does, would the carefully crafted version of the story that the Ramsay family embedded in the public's mind still hold up? Thank you for watching. Drop a comment with your thoughts, hit like, share, and subscribe. See you in the next video.